What's up, conscious monkeys? Welcome back to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. I'm your host, Clayton, and today we are joined by someone who used to be a self-proclaimed atheist who has moved on to now the spiritual realm. We're going to get into the afterlife. We're going to get into possibly aliens on this podcast. As we were starting out, the whole goal is to just let's get weird. And so on this episode, I'm getting weird with Jonas Rosen. And so, Jonas, how you doing?
Doing great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, man, thanks for being here. I'm glad our paths were able to cross and we could sit down to get this thing happening.
Yes, likewise.
So let's start off. The place I usually start off with new guests is try to figure out what was the first thing that Jonas wanted to be whenever he grew up.
Well, when I was a young kid, I mean, my first dream was to be in the NBA.
Okay, love it.
Yeah, I'm still working on that one.
Don't let it die.
No, no. I mean, yeah. I mean, growing up, I was an athlete. Really loved sports, but pretty quickly realized that wasn't realistic. Yeah, I mean, after the age of like 7, when I sort of laid that dream to rest. I was exploring a lot of different things over about 10 or 15 years ago. Psychedelic assisted therapy really caught my attention. Well, I mean, to be fair, it really started as my own sort of interest and curiosity in exploring plant medicines, and which stemmed even deeper from a curiosity to investigate the nature of reality. To learn more about the human condition, to learn more about the nature of mind, the nature of consciousness, which strikes me as arguably the greatest mystery in existence, is ironically not out there somewhere in the universe, but within here right now, the space of awareness, which, in spite of all of our scientific progress, remains as one of the greatest mysteries, the nature of consciousness. And psychedelics, of course, are not the only tool for that inward exploration of consciousness, but they're one of the most ancient, they're one of the most powerful, they're one of the most universal from all over the world. And certainly for me, it was a key to unlocking an entirely new perspective. And right around that same time that I started exploring psychedelics for myself, I very quickly realized that the profound therapeutic implications and efficacy of this thing, and started to really dive deep down that rabbit hole and, just absorb as much learning as I could about the research that's being done at Johns Hopkins, Imperial College of London, NYU, and other prestigious institutions around the world. And that led me to the work I do today, which is a psychedelic facilitator or practitioner.
So let's start off with kind of what it was like at the beginning with your whole psychedelic experience. What was kind of like, let's say, your first introduction to plant medicine, to psychedelics? What was like the home life like? Did you grow up in like a strict household? Were your parents like, okay with it? What was the whole intro to psychedelics?
Yeah, well, I mean, growing up, I actually had a lot of fear and apprehension of psychedelics and really all substances in general. I mean, these are ideas that are kind of conditioned into us from a very young age that, any psychedelic substance is a danger to our mind, to our wellness, to our sanity. And so, I really carried those sort of program beliefs for quite some time. When I first encountered psychedelics, it was my first experience was with psilocybin mushrooms. I was in college, and I really didn't seek it out. My friend had some and sort of offered, and I have always been a really just curious individual, driven by curiosity in a lot of aspects of my life. And so I gave it a shot, and yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit about that first experience. I was in Nashville, where I went to college at the time, and
real quick, let me. I want to hear it, but let's like set the stage. Let's set the stage a little bit more. So, if you were a self-proclaimed atheist, would this have been before or after this psychedelic experience?
That was before. So that first experience didn't instantly change everything, but it precipitated a shift. It put a crack in that sort of like hardened shell of atheism, and opened my mind to the reality that everything is a mystery and I don't know. And
that's a great place to start.
That opened the doorway for a deeper exploration.
So if we roll back a little bit more, I'm not very well versed in what an atheist is. My general idea is that they just don't believe in God. Are you able to expand what your definition of an atheist would be, or like the way you kind of saw the world, let's say, when you identified as an atheist?
Sure, that's a good question. Yeah, so I mean, it was definitely, I mean, I think it overlaps a lot with sort of a materialist conception of life in the cosmos, where and certainly a scientific and rational one as well. I've always been like a very scientifically oriented individual, and sort of as an atheist, my perspective was not only is there no evidence for God, this was my perspective at the time,
sure,
but it's a fantasy. It's false, and that the idea that there is some aspect of divinity. My understanding was that science can and will explain everything, all of the mysteries of life in the universe in due time, and that my entire experience of life and consciousness was explicable through a purely mechanistic, materialistic understanding, meaning that there's no room for soul or any kind of spiritual essence. My experience of consciousness itself is sort of the byproduct and an emergent property or epiphenomenon of the complex interaction of neurons in the brain. And there's nothing more to what I am than this physical body. And so that's how I saw life in the cosmos. That there is no divine essence to life or to what I am, what we are.
So, and maybe you answered it, I got a little bit of lag there, but did you kind of just see it all as random then, or that nothing was connected? Or like, how did you kind of view the world in the sense of, well, like, how are we able to have this like future and past, whereas everything else seems to be reactionary, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess I did see everything as random and yet oriented and operating in accordance with the natural laws of the cosmos,
of like the material world, I guess, in that sense.
Right.
And so, okay, so if we kind of couple this, right, with wanting to be a basketball player, and you said like around the age of, I think you said like 7 or 8, you kind of thought, well, maybe it's not for me. Where in your mind were you, like when you went to college? Did you have an idea of what you wanted to be, where you wanted to go in the material world?
Yeah, like, no, I didn't. I mean, for a long time I didn't, and that was a really hard place to be, actually, was to sort of I think this is one of the most challenging, aspects of the human condition, is this quest for meaning and purpose. And, ideally that aligns with our occupation or our work or our vocation, but not always. Right. And so like what I began to sense as I was going through college was more and more, there was like, I was exploring some interesting and cool ideas. I was starting to meditate a lot. I was just starting to, explore sort of wisdom traditions out of the East, Buddhism and Taoism and things like that. And but I didn't see a clear like occupational box to fit that in. And even, as this passion and profound excitement around the field of psychedelics started to emerge, even it almost like heightened the challenge because it's illegal here in the US. And so, in my mind, there was no opportunities to do this work. So it was kind of like this crisis of of meaning and purpose that, was, probably the greatest challenge that I've had to navigate thus far in this lifetime. But, I was moving in the direction of, how can I be of service? How can I help others? Because it struck me pretty early on that was, if I'm not going to be in the NBA, like, this is one of the places that genuinely feels meaningful and enriching and valuable to the world. It's just to be of service to others. And I was drawn to healing, to psychotherapy, and was, kind of building in the direction of becoming a talk therapist. As in my mind, that was a building block towards eventually getting more deeply involved in the field of psychedelic assisted therapy.
And so whenever you were in college then, were you like a psych major, or what was your direction that you felt? Because you mentioned that your first experience with psychedelics was in college. So, what were you going for, I guess, when you went to college, or what was the idea there?
Yeah, I actually started as an economics major, really for the only reason that's what all the cool kids were doing. And that's what, that was the route into the most lucrative jobs: consulting, banking, finance, all that stuff, which, I knew very quickly that I didn't want to do that, but it was like, okay, if not that, then what? And it was right around the time that I had that first psilocybin experience, which was when I was a freshman in college, that it was a shift in a reprioritization of values, I would say, a shift in my value hierarchy, and away from just like making lots of money to doing things that are meaningful and important and fulfilling. And I ended up sort of defaulting to sociology just because it seemed like that would still give me, freedom and space to explore sort of interdisciplinary, a broad range of different issues as I continue to hone my interests and passions.
And sociology, that's the study of like groups of people, like
right.
Okay. And how far did you try to make that like a minor, or was that kind of like just the a side study that you were interested in?
That's what I majored in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I majored in coming out of college.
Oh, so you switched then from economics to sociology?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Like pretty much right after that first psilocybin experience, I was like, nah, never mind.
That was your first awakening moment. You were like, oh, I need to be somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was a significant aspect of that experience, was exploring, all the anxiety that I had around like this sort of crisis of meaning and like, where am I going in this lifetime?
Well, tell us about that, because you were about to start telling us and I kind of cut you off, but if you could you tell us about that first experience?
Sure. Yeah. I'd be happy to. So I was a freshman in college. I was going to school in Nashville. One of my friends had some mushrooms and offered me to join, and I decided to go for it. And we went to a sort of a nearby park in Nashville, and I remember sitting down in the grass and just kind of laying down, and it was a really special experience for a lot of reasons. Well, first I noticed myself to be profoundly present, just in my body, not lost in thought. I noticed pretty quickly that, as there was more of that inner stillness and less kind of like lost in the mind and in thought, there was a very peaceful quality to it. It was like all of this anxiety that I had, it wasn't always a high level of anxiety, but there was like this constant low level background noise of anxiety just as I was trying to work through, what am I doing in this lifetime? And so that was remarkable. But as the effects, kicked in even more strongly, I remember just looking around at, the seemingly mundane details of life, like the insects flying overhead. I was like seeing these tracers behind the insects, the trees swaying in the wind, the clouds passing overhead, and the grass. I was like captivated by the grass. I was like is anyone else seeing this grass? Because it's really beautiful, and what struck me was that I've come to regard this as like kind of my first encounter with the sacred, and what I mean by that is like in that moment, as I was sitting there and just observing all these details, and seeing like the intricacy, the beauty, the complexity, and yet the elegance of like all these like seemingly simple things. It was like there was this almost there was this miraculous or magical quality that I really hadn't noticed prior to that, and it was like this feeling of awe. I was just overwhelmed by awe, and it was kind of like an experience of awe therapy, where that feeling that you get when you're out in a beautiful place out in nature or in a sacred space like a temple or cathedral or something, and it's just like, whoa, it's almost like this cognitive like reframing of everything, and
it's kind of like that feeling if you are like ever staring at the stars and like you see every star in the sky, or if you like walk into a cathedral in Eastern Europe and you just are like almost overwhelmed with the magnitude but sheer detail at the same time. Exactly.
And and everything just appeared miraculous and beautiful and exquisite in a way that like really like captivated my attention. And I also remember at a certain point in that experience feeling my own heart beating, and such a simple thing, but felt enormously profound in that moment. I was just so present, and it was like one of those flow states where you're just effortlessly absorbed, like completely absorbed in life as it is, and feeling my heart beat. And it was almost funny to me, like I'm sitting here, I'm doing absolutely nothing to try to make my heart beat. It's just happening. And with that, all of this kind of this flowing experience, it was like feeling like there is this this exquisite dance, this miraculous unfolding, which somehow from the Big Bang, like 13.8 whatever billion years ago to this very moment, life has somehow of its own accord spontaneously unfolded into this like seemingly random but also infinitely beautiful and organized and patterned dance, this symphony of life, and so all of that kind of happening together. I mean, it was really a beautiful experience. All of that happening together, again, it wasn't like an instant shift. Okay, I'm no longer an atheist, but it was like there is a miraculous or a sacred quality to everything, every iota of existence that I had previously not fully recognized and had overlooked, and found it very, very difficult to explain from a purely materialistic or mechanistic worldview.
And so whenever you felt that shift a little bit, right? Like, did you feel like it was a piece that you needed to somehow integrate into your current kind of belief system of atheism? Because, and I ask this because like the way I kind of have been viewing, I guess, consciousness, it's like, something occurs, let's say, that's just slightly off from what you believe, but something feels right about it. And so it takes like almost time to integrate it into your current realm of belief, right? So, if you take that from an atheistic point of view, and then it's like, okay, you just had this you were looking at grass, you were looking at bugs, and had this like otherworldly experience of sorts. Do you remember like what that integration process felt like? Like Like, was there something in your previous line of thinking that you were like, oh, I need to update this? Or how does this fit into that puzzle of being an atheist?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, this was about 10 years ago. So, there was a lot that happened. And I think in a lot of ways, the integration continues till the day we die, as long as we live. Part of it was that, talking about beliefs and our sort of core beliefs and system of beliefs that then determine in a large way how we experience and perceive the world. In my previous frame of understanding, beliefs actually really had no relevance or no place, because in the quest for truth, what value does a belief offer to me? But in that experience, I recognized, I guess atheism in itself is a belief. There's no proof whatsoever of there being no divinity. That's right. An unprovable assertion. So I think it moved me more towards agnosticism, where it was like, I'm now open to possibilities because I don't know. One of the really amazing things about the psychedelic experience is that it and this has been demonstrated in sort of the scientific research. Brain scans of people while they're under the influence of psilocybin and other psychedelic compounds. These psychedelics have the capacity to shut down what's called the default mode network in the brain, which is basically, my understanding of it is it's essentially the scientific jargon for our conditioned way of our default mode, our conditioned way of seeing and experiencing and perceiving the world. In the psychedelic space, it has this amazing capacity to essentially shut that part of the brain off or turn down the volume on that. So there's more lateral thinking. There's actually more, interconnection and communication between different parts of the brain. And it's almost like seeing the world with fresh eyes. It's almost like just being born into the moment. If you strip away all of your, past conditioning, my name is Jonas and I have these beliefs and I'm this kind of person and the world is this kind of way. Imagine like just being born into the moment and seeing everything as it is without any filters, without any judgment, without any labels, without any analysis. This is a really, really interesting experience because, how could it not all appear as mysterious and miraculous from that vantage point? The mind is so constantly trying to assess and judge and understand and conceptualize and label everything. This is an evolutionary mechanism. It's important. It's important to have that ability. You see a car crossing the street, you're like, car, don't hit it. Avoid. Avoid. But it can also operate as a invisible prison where we are without even recognizing the limitations that we impose upon ourselves in our way of perceiving the world. It confines us. It limits our understanding. And so this was interesting that to realize after that experience that as hard as I was trying to be scientific and rational and objective, that itself was a form of dogmatism.
Right. I think that's a beautiful, there's a couple things here. Number one, I think it's a beautiful, kind of thing to point out of how you're saying, atheism is about not believing, and yet to hold the idea of atheism is almost a belief within itself. It's the belief of not believing, which is pretty fascinating. Right. And maybe if you have friends and you're listening, don't point that out to an atheist because you might not have a friend afterwards. But the analogy or the metaphor that it sounds like you're describing is it's almost like, you called it the default neural system.
Default mode network.
The default mode network is almost like, if you drive to work every day, you have this certain path that you're always going down. You always make a right on I-279. You always get off at exit 19. You then make a left. And it's like you fit everything into that mode of being or that idea. And then once you have this profound experience, it's almost like you get lifted up out of the car and you're like, wait, you can go all these different directions, or you don't even have to take a car. You can walk through the woods here, or you could get on a plane and go here, or you could go all the way over to this city and then come back. And it like really expands your mind to seeing how many different paths there are that is beyond your everyday comprehension.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a perfect analogy for it.
Yeah. And so you feel like that was kind of the seed that got like kind of planted in there whenever you started unraveling this whole atheistic mindset, I guess, that you kind of were going through.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that experience like instantaneously, prompted a profound fascination in psychedelics more generally, and in a continued exploration of the human condition and the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality. And I mean, it was just absolutely astonishing to me that a few grams of a dried mushroom facilitated this unbelievable transformation in my consciousness, and almost caused me to feel that, I was tapping into a more fuller experience of the capacities of my brain,
Yeah.
and it just made me so curious and interested to continue exploring. I mean, around that same time, even prior to that experience, I think part of why I had such a profound experience there was because I had already been exploring meditation quite a bit. And so like, I think that in order to really, I see this all the time in my work as a psychedelic facilitator, that like people who bring some aspect of meditation, mindfulness, inner stillness, the ability to be centered and observe life in a non-judgmental way, to sort of surrender into presence, to let go of any sort of resistance and flow. This is the key to getting to reaping the most rewards from the psychedelic experience, is the combination of meditation with psychedelics. And so I had that going on. I was also starting to explore, as I mentioned, some different wisdom traditions, and I sort of dove into exploring different spiritual teachings. So like Eckhart Tolle was the Power of Now was really influential.
Yeah.
It was really influential for me. And from that point, I just started exploring more and more and more, Ram Dass, Mooji, Sadhguru, Thich Nhat Hanh, Adyashanti, all these different teachers. And it almost became like I just wanted to absorb more and more and more information as a key part of my integration, of continuing to cultivate wisdom, and a sense of inner peace. And
so how did that kind of like unfold, right? If we're looking at the timeline of events, how did it go from, so it was atheist, you took the gram, and then you're like, whoa, what's going on here? You then kind of shifted your major to sociology. Was it like was this like a couple weeks, a couple months, and then you started diving into all these spiritual teachers? How did the kind of the timeline look like with all that?
Yeah, it was within a couple. It happened pretty quickly from that point. It was within a couple weeks. Matter of a couple of months. I mean, for years after that, and it continues, like exploring different spiritual teachings and just absorbing different approaches from different teachers, and seeing, trying to assess again in a non-dogmatic way, in a non-religious kind of way. What resonates, what holds true, what rings true for me. And, so all that was happening. I mean, really the major shift occurred a few months later after that, as I was continuing to explore psychedelics. That I then learned about DMT and dimethyltryptamine, which is known as the spirit molecule. For anyone who isn't familiar with this substance, it's one of arguably the single most powerful psychedelic compound on the planet. It's the psychoactive compound in ayahuasca, which is this ancient shamanic brew that's been used for thousands of years in the Amazon rainforest by indigenous people. And, interestingly enough, I mean, DMT is just such a fascinating topic. I've made numerous videos on it, and I could really talk for days about this stuff, because it is what really, really facilitated this shift away from, I moved from atheism to agnosticism. And then what really propelled me from agnosticism into this belief, this what I would say is an inner knowing of divinity was my exploration of DMT, the spirit molecule.
So let's definitely talk about that. Something I find interesting is how you went from shrooms, which I would consider, let's say, like a soft psychedelic, and then you, within a few months, went to what I would consider one of the hardest psychedelics. And when I say hardest, kind of like you're talking about, it's the most, I guess, explosive. It's the most
intense,
connected to consciousness that we kind of have. So how did you decide within a couple months you were like, all right, I'm ready for the full trip?
Well, I didn't immediately ingest DMT myself within a few months.
Okay.
So I learned as I was exploring the field of psychedelics and just absorbing information, stumbled across this thing and spent really the next year of my life like pretty obsessively fascinated by it and learning everything I could before I tried it myself. That day did come eventually, but that was a while later. There's a book called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. It was also turned into a documentary where Joe Rogan is narrating.
No way.
And yeah. It's called DMT, the Spirit Molecule.
Check it out.
It's worth looking up. Definitely check it out. I mean, the book is just fascinating. It's written by this guy, Dr. Rick Strassman, who I actually have interviewed him on my YouTube channel. And Dr. Strassman, he's a psychiatrist at University of New Mexico. In 1991, he was the first person to do human psychedelic research in the United States legally after that whole like 20 or 30 year hiatus, government, smackdown there. He was the first person to do human psychedelic research in the United States in 91 at the University of New Mexico, and it was with N-dimethyltryptamine. And over the span of 5 years, he administered around 400 doses of DMT intravenously to around 60 different research participants, and published multiple scientific research articles about it, and also wrote about his findings and that work in this book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule. So it's not just some, purely theoretical thing. It's actually like, this is based on real world research that happened where, people were having these truly incredible beyond words experiences of profound shifts in consciousness that we can get into the DMT experience if you want to explore that. Of subjectively, it feels like an out of body experience where sort of the last layer of our humanity is stripped away. It feels like consciousness or awareness or soul or spirit, if you want to call it that, leaves the body temporarily. Terence McKenna, the famous psychonaut, described it as a 100% reality switch, in the sense that one moment you're sitting on your couch, a few moments later you're in another place that feels like some sort of alternate realm or dimension or plane of existence beyond the physical universe, outside of space and time. And in that sense is really, really just a profound look into the nature of reality, the nature of the brain and mind and consciousness, that is what really convinced me of the reality that there is more
to kind of
this
explore
mystery.
it more. Yeah.
There's more to this mystery than what meets the eye.
And so then what, I guess, so for me, I've kind of meddled with DMT, but I never, what is it called? Like breaking through. I never like broke through. I saw the stained glass window, but never like broke through, I think is kind of the analogy they use. Right. So to kind of, I'll give you my partial experience, and then I'd love to hear yours in conjunction, is where, I kind of tried a little bit of it. I didn't do enough, I guess. And you kind of hear like this ringing, right? And then there's a quote unquote stained glass window. For me, it was a little grayish, but it had the characteristics of a stained glass window. And you could feel like lighter almost is the best way to describe it. Now, how does that, I'm assuming it kind of like faded away. And so from what I've heard is you can actually kind of, let's say, break through that stained glass window. And on the other side is this realm of infinite time. And, it's like the time space reality that, Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about essentially in his work. What do you, and I remember, and I'm kind of just throwing all this at you, but I also kind of remember people have talked about it being difficult to remember what they've kind of gone through on their experiences. Did you find it, like, what did you experience? And did you kind of find it difficult to remember things on your experience or your trip?
Yeah, well, absolutely. It can be very difficult to remember. I mean, in some cases, it does feel like how when you wake up after having a dream, it's like you can remember like a little bits and pieces of it, but it fades away really quickly, and then it's hard to consciously recall. Part of it, I kind of describe it as like trying to, if you have a hard drive that has like 1 gigabyte of space and you try to like cram 1 terabyte of information onto that hard drive being like the physical brain, it don't work.
Yeah.
you can't, because it's, not only would I describe it as, I would almost describe it as timeless. I would describe like space and time as properties of physicality, of the physical universe. And what the potential is here with this experience is subjectively transcending physicality altogether and encountering non-physical or immaterial or energetic or astral or whatever you want to call it, planes of existence that coexist with this one, but are invisible to our physical senses. So it sort of suggests like multiverse theory or the idea of multidimensionality or interdimensionality, the idea that, as vast and infinite as this physical universe is, it's only the tiniest tip of the iceberg. There is so much more to the mystery of life than what meets the eye. And there basically, I mean, there's other layers, other realms, other dimensions of existence which coexist with this, which can intersect and interact with this physical material realm, but are outside of our ordinary perception. However, consciousness on that consciousness level is the level on which I now am convinced we're actually interconnected and plugged into all these other aspects of reality, because consciousness itself, as I now see it, is non-local, meaning it's beyond the physical brain. It's not just it exists independently of and beyond. It transcends physicality. It's like a fundamental property or aspect or quality of reality itself.
And so does that kind of, whenever you're kind of talking there, it's like, does that kind of tie into, I know you did a lot of videos on like the afterlife and near-death experiences, and it sounds like a lot of doctors, based on the videos you uploaded, are people who, let's say doctors who have studied people with near-death experiences. They're pretty convinced that there's an afterlife due to the fact that the brain shuts down, due to the fact that there's no pulse. Do you kind of view it in conjunction with that same, let's say, plane of existence as you experience with DMT?
That's a great question. Yes and no. In the sense that I don't believe that all DMT experiences are necessarily like a genuine glimpse into whatever sort of afterlife or beyond. I'm not saying that all DMT experiences are true or factually or empirically objectively true, but I think that some of them can be. I think it can open those doors of perception. And what's really interesting is that, so near-death experiences is a fascinating body, a significant body of scientific research and evidence that presents extremely compelling evidence of the continuation of consciousness beyond the functioning of our physical body. Extremely compelling evidence, and I can give you some examples of that. But what's super interesting is that research has actually found, and there are published articles on this. I've actually made a video on this topic comparing near death and DMT experiences, and actually there are some really fascinating parallels between these two experiences. For example, I mean, in both cases, DMT and near-death experiences, there's a broad range of different types of experiences. I'm not saying they're the same, but they share some really interesting characteristics. For example, both of the experiences begin with a sense of consciousness or awareness separating from the physical body, moving through some sort of a tunnel or a portal towards a light, into the light, going, breaking through or emerging on the other side in some sort of a non-physical realm of existence, encountering beings or entities there, and gaining new insights and glimpses into the nature of reality. These are felt to be profoundly sacred experiences. They're felt to be real. This is another interesting aspect of both of these experiences, is that almost every single person will return from these experiences saying, I have no idea what just happened, but it felt even more real than this reality. Then returning back into the body. And so, all of these characteristics are the same between these two experiences. So it's interesting. I mean, in that book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, Rick Strassman actually talks about this, and he there has been speculation or theories put forth that the endogenous release of DMT, which I hadn't mentioned yet, this is another fascinating mystery of the DMT experience, is that we all have this powerful psychedelic compound within our systems right now. Every single mammalian species that's been tested has been found to endogenously or naturally produce DMT. Not only that, but thousands of different plant and animal species, thousands of different species all over the world naturally produce DMT. Common grass has trace amounts of DMT in it. This is a complete mystery. We have no idea evolutionarily why have we evolved to naturally produce the most powerful psychedelic compound on the planet. Why? And physiologically, what role does it play in our system? These are massive unanswered questions, right? So, but people have theorized or speculated that the near-death experience could be explained by the endogenous release of DMT in the body around the time of death.
Right, because that's something that they certainly, at least from my memory of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that when you do die, there is a large amount of DMT that floods the brain. Is that accurate?
The evidence there needs to be more research here. The evidence thus far, it does suggest that to be true, and this is commonly shared as a fact. I believe it is true, but it's kind of inconclusive. I mean, people do there is sort of preliminary evidence to support that conclusion, as well as that there's also a endogenous release of DMT around the time of while the fetus is growing in utero, which has led other people to speculate, like, is this the spirit molecule that is basically the biological basis, the molecular or chemical basis that facilitates the entering and exiting of the soul or spiritual essence into and out of the physical form.
It almost sounds like,
I don't know. I'm not saying that is true, but it could be. Who knows?
But that's also a fascinating thing to find anything, right? Whether or not it's DMT or something else, but for there to be something so powerful that it's with us at birth and then carries us into death as well. I mean, I feel like anything that is kind of conjoining those two elements, right, is something that we should definitely take pretty seriously, or at least something that should be deeper investigated, just due to the nature of, the idea that death, even as a sense, is sort of an illusion, right? We try to conceptualize that death and life are the opposite, whereas it's really birth and death that are the opposite, and life is just the medium that's in some sense continuously going.
Yeah, correct. I see it the same way. And, I 100,000% agree that this is a massive mystery that could have profound revolutionary implications into our scientific understanding of the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness, some of life's greatest mysteries. It demands investigation. It demands investigation, and not many people are talking about it. And, that's a big part of the reason why I've made the YouTube channel and make videos discussing this subject.
I love it, because that's like a huge reason that I'm here as well. And again, it's probably one of those things of that same path. But something that you kind of briefly discussed was like the idea of reality, right? The idea of people have these psychedelic trips or these journeys, and they see it as being more real than, the physical reality that they have lived in for who knows how many years, 20, 30, 40, 50. And something that it was reminding me of, and maybe this was something that kind of shifted me, is there's a documentary on Netflix called Life in Color. And it goes through all these different animal species, and it shows you kind of the way that they view the world around them, where deers are essentially like red-green colorblind, I believe. And so it's like, we say to ourselves, like, why would a tiger be, this orange colored creature in the prairie? It's like, that would be the most alarming color for them to be. Well, meanwhile, their prey can't see it worth shit because it's just blending in with grass from their viewpoint. There's butterflies that if we look at them, they look like they're just brown and black and kind of ugly. But if they look at them through like a UV light, they are like these most mosaic and beautiful colored creatures on our planet. And so it really like takes you back, and it's like, well, we're only viewing things through the red, green, blue color spectrum. Whereas, some animals see less, some see more. And so even that kind of was like breaking my own understanding of like, well, what actually is going on here? Like, what if we could actually see like the Wi-Fi signals that are going throughout our house? You would be seeing lines kind of just flickering everywhere. And it's really crazy that evolution has kind of formed in that way.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And let me riff on that for a second. Because I mean, this is something I've thought about often. I mean, we have these, 5 main sense perceptions, right? And each one of them is limited. I mean, within, visible light to our human eyes is less than 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum. So, like you said, we can't see Wi-Fi signals. We can't see infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, and yet they're all real, right? Likewise, we can only hear within certain frequencies. We can only feel and taste and touch and think within a range of experience. So it's like our entire experience of reality is like we're watching one TV station on a set that has infinite other potential stations, and we're basing we're materialist science is saying that we understand the whole thing based on these limited sense perceptions. Of course, we can build tools and technologies to expand those perceptions. Like we use a telescope to peer more deeply into the sky, into the cosmos. I very much understand DMT and these other psychedelics as the equivalent of a telescope inwardly into our mind, into our inner world. And so this is a shift in a framework or perspective of thinking that, these experiences are all just chemically induced hallucinations in the brain. Well, maybe, but what if it could be more than that? Maybe these are tools that facilitate a deeper or more profound or more subtle experience, a true glimpse into the nature of reality that's beyond our ordinary sense perception and ordinary reality. And Dennis McKenna, who's the brother of Terence McKenna, has this quote where he's like, all of life is a drug experience. Every single waking moment is a chemically mediated process, right? And so who is to say that this set of neurochemical conditions is more real or more valid or more true than this other set where, yes, now you're on DMT or psilocybin, and yet you're having these experiences that feel even more real than this moment. So who is to say that this is more valid or more true than that? I mean, for me, that doesn't equate, right? That it's a fallacy. It's a logical error there. But this is our, mainstream science, our the entire field of mainstream or materialist science is basing their study and examination of psychedelics in the mind and consciousness on this materialist paradigm, that all of these experiences are nothing more than hallucinations in the brain. It's like the whole, atheism is actually a belief idea. This as well is an unprovable assertion, and yet it's taught to us as fact. So I really take issue with that, and I think, again, I'm not saying that every single DMT experience is a real glimpse into the nature of reality. All these DMT entities and stuff are objectively real. I'm saying they could be in some cases, and it definitely feels that way.
Well, even if we take a step back and look at dreams, for instance, like you go to sleep, you have a dream, and you use this as a parallel earlier. And this could be a gateway for anyone who's never dabbled with psychedelics, right? You wake up from a dream in a state, let's say if it's a nightmare, in a state of fear and anxiety, and, you're frightened and you're agitated. And, you can, and kids even, they see it as being so real, right? Like that happened. Like this monster with claws and fangs came after me and, under my bed and is chasing me. It's like, so at some level, that's real, right? Like even if we can't explain it with this material world, this material subset of instruments and tools we have a proclivity to just tell, kids from a young age, like, oh, your dreams weren't real, don't listen to them. And it's like, I went through this whole path of researching like lucid dreaming and whatnot. And to me, it seems like it's something that your subconscious has a tendency to create. And you can learn lessons from it that you can then bring back into the material world to use and better yourself almost. But we've, at some level, just said it's easier to just tell people that it's not real. And so I find it so fascinating how we construct what is real. Like, what do we define as real? Like we could say this laptop's real, but isn't it just a bunch of atoms running around in space? So, is it really a laptop, or is it a bunch of atoms disguised to be a laptop?
We're going deep today, Clayton.
We do that on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, this is like one of the most one of the most profound questions that anyone can ask is and it's a fundamental question when we're exploring what is the nature of reality, right? Like, how do we know what's real and what's not? I mean, what is knowledge? I mean, what can we truly prove beyond a shadow of a doubt? And it turns out there's not that much. I mean, really, like, only one of the only things that we can say for sure is that I am. There is something here that is happening,
right?
this experience is undeniable. I don't know what it is. It's all a mystery,
Right.
but there's something and so like, I mean, that is kind of, could be turned into a argument for that consciousness is fundamental, and some people say, this is, a sort of like philosophical or ontological worldview that consciousness is not only fundamental, but it is the ultimate reality. And yeah, that is something that I do sort of subscribe to myself.
I would also love to point out, I'm a big fan of the fact that you said the only thing that's real is I am, because I know that there's a very common saying is I think, therefore I am. And I feel like that is, I don't know who said it, and so I'm not going to call anyone out, but I feel like that is a huge blunder in our society, is to describe that we are because we think. And
right.
And because if you are able to pull yourself kind of out of, when you go into deep meditation, for instance, you start to realize that, your thoughts create emotion, your emotions create thoughts, and it's this vicious cycle. Now,
right.
when you go into meditation, you cut off all thinking, and it's like, okay, well, I'm not thinking, but I still am. It's not I think, therefore I am. It's I am, therefore I am. And so so I just wanted to point out that I feel like that's a huge misstep, and I don't know who the philosopher was, and we don't have to harp on it, but I just felt like I feel like that has probably been a huge, like, maybe stranglehold on human consciousness in a way, that we're like, oh, we think, therefore we're real, and nothing else is real. It's like, you don't have to think to be real. It's like, you are. So therefore you are.
It's so true. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Well said. And I really think that's the sort of the basis of awakening, of spiritual awakening, if you want to call it that. But like, even, I mean, it's undeniable, no matter who you are, that there is some aspect or quality that is to what we are, to our daily lived experience, that's deeper than the cognitive, conscious, analytical, rational mind. And this is the one of the most essential components of awakening, is recognizing that there is a voice, there is this sort of inner narrator, inner critic, who's constantly chattering away, but that is not true self. That is not who I am. Right. On the deepest level. It's an experience within consciousness. You're exactly right that, like, when there is no thinking, we can go into the space between our thoughts, and I am
right
still. So I think, I mean, that's what meditation is pointing to, and that is the universal, all over the world, regardless of social or cultural background, spiritual wisdom, any wisdom tradition from all over the world, is all pointing to this: presence, awareness, introspection into the nature of self, going deeper than the mind, and contacting or exploring the nature of true self, which inescapably leads us to the conclusion that what I am on that deep, true level is beyond the thinking mind, and this is where liberation begins to unfold.
Right.
When we recognize that, when we identify that true self is not defined by the mind.
Right. It's I think the best description I have is it's like the silent observer. Might be Eckhart Tolle who coined that phrase, but it's like you're this silent observer, and once you are able to kind of parse away the fact that you're not your thoughts, you're not your feelings, it's like, okay, well, what's left? It's like, that's where like kind of the fun begins of, what's going over domain of this and what's actually happening. And to tie this kind of back to the whole DMT thing, it's like when I was kind of asking, are you able to kind of describe it? And you're like, well, it's kind of like a dream, and it's hard to bring back everything. It's like the only thing that our brain is able to consciously comprehend are these human experiences. So everything that gets filtered through our consciousness is a human, revelation. And this is kind of, not to get biblical and whatnot, but I always kind of viewed the Bible, well, not always, I take that back, but recently I viewed it like these stories that are trying to describe this higher state of being. And I believe most sacred texts that's what they're doing, is it's not trying to say, okay, there's actually this God that had 8 heads and 5 arms and, 8 kids. It's like, no, that's just a story that we're trying to use to explain this higher state of being. And we only have these words and our culture to try to describe this infinite realm that is spaceless and timeless, which is even damn near impossible to comprehend just at that form. And so we need to get stories to it to give it structure and meaning.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And again, I very much agree with that. And, I think that could be true for some of the DMT experiences as well. And I'll say as well, not all of them are difficult to bring back. I've had experiences with this that are etched into my memory for forever.
Yeah.
Because they were so profound and meaningful. But I think that's one level of understanding non-ordinary states of consciousness, these psychedelic experiences, dreams as well. That it's a symbolic experience or a metaphorical experience in some ways. That's not always literally true, but is a way that is a mode of communicating truth that is somehow comprehensible or relatable to the human brain, the human mind, so that like we're taking like the infinite mysteries of life that are way beyond comprehension, and relating to them or being presented with some sort of symbolic experience that then facilitates a shift in perspective or understanding that brings us closer to truth in a way.
Right. It like gets us a little bit closer to it. It gets us closer to the realist of realities, maybe is a way to look at it.
Yeah.
Something like that. Well, let's, that was fascinating. And so let's try to tie this back into what you do now, right? So how did you find your way into helping people kind of get through, psychedelic trips? Like, what unfolded from graduating from college with a sociology degree that, because I don't think there's many places that advertise in America, hey, come to our foreign country to administer psychedelics.
No. I mean, well, I guess like there was a part of it that was kind of like organic and natural. I mean, as I continued to explore psychedelics, in some cases with my friends and sort of informally, I was like a trip sitter, and I enjoyed that role. I loved that work. It was always profound and meaningful. And, in many cases, a lot of fun too. Like it's incredible. And it just always brought me closer to, the mystery. And, yeah, I mean, after college, it was a little bit of a sort of like, there were plenty of twists and turns in the path. It wasn't a direct route. I ended up going to, I traveled for a while, which was, a hugely impactful experience for me. When I got back, from traveling to the US, then I applied to a master's of social work, because that just seemed like that was a struggle in and of itself to make that decision, a huge struggle. But, I did that because, again, it seemed like a step in the direction of working as a therapist, which then would be a step towards psychedelic assisted therapy. Graduated, while I was approaching graduation, I basically had this, moment of, it was both a moment of inspiration as well as a moment of desperation. I was like, I want so badly to do this thing. I know it's my passion. This is where my heart is. Like, this is what like sets me on fire, you know? And so basically I just like, you know, just had the intuition or the inspiration to look internationally. I was like, I know there are places where this is legally available. Everything is legit. Everything is professional and above ground. Like, this is an ancient thing. And so I started looking and basically just sent out my resume. Like, I just emailed like literally every single person and place I could find, and probably like 98% never answered me. But the Psilocybin Retreat Center where I work now was one of the few places that got back to me. Started there as flew down to Jamaica the summer after graduating, worked as an unpaid volunteer for a few retreats, and that led to a job there.
So what exactly, you said you sent out your resume. What exactly does a resume look like to get you a job at a psilocybin retreat? Did you write in like, hey, I've messed around with, you know, psilocybin before and DMT? Like how, like, what does that whole like line of questioning look like?
No, I mean, of course, like it was a professional resume. I was documenting my professional experience and sort of highlighting my social work and therapeutic experience. And it is important, I think, for any psychedelic practitioner to have multiple frameworks of understanding the human psyche, and beyond that, therapeutic interventions that are effective, that are demonstrably like they work. So it is important. I mean, like this. To answer your question, that's what I sort of highlighted in my resume. And you know, like the psychedelic, working in the psychedelic space is such a massive responsibility, because when people are in these non-ordinary states of consciousness, a lot of times they're at their most raw, their most vulnerable, their most emotionally sensitive, and as well as they're most digestible, honestly. I mean, like if someone is on a few grams of mushrooms, a single word that you say can take their entire trip in a certain direction, you know, like that's real.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, I think anyone who's working in this space, professionally or even informally, needs to be aware and feel the weight of that responsibility, because, you know, it's not always that sensitive and delicate. Most of the time it's not, but it can be. If you're working with a person with an intense history of trauma or severe depression, anxiety, like it can be that you have this person's wellness in your hands in a big way. And so like, we need to meet that responsibility with a degree of competence.
And is there, so something I know, cause I've done some plant medicine therapies myself, but with your practice and the whole psilocybin thing, is there a level that you try to push them out of their comfort zone a little bit? Cause I say this because like, I know that, like you're saying, you can kind of go into a bad trip or have like very negative thoughts, you know, very quickly. But is there like a level of needing to get them to a place to heal, right? Because, you know, nothing heals itself in the dark. You need to expose it to light, which can be very uncomfortable for people to do. So is there like a general rule of thumb that you kind of go by? Is it kind of like a feeling to get these people to a place where they are trusting you, but they are able to kind of break those barriers down for themselves?
It's a really good question, and it's kind of like yes and no. It's a bit of a delicate thing here. I mean, it's important that when you first meet a client who you're working with, to establish trust and rapport, where they can begin to trust you, to know that you have good intentions, and you can begin to relate that there's a genuine connection on some level. And you know, as a facilitator, I think it's important to communicate that this is a unconditionally supportive and non-judgmental role. As a facilitator, man, I can tell you I've seen some crazy go down. You know what I'm saying?
In like the psychiatric realm, or like people like having out about like people having mental breaks?
No, not in terms of a mental break. I mean, like in terms of everyone responds to this experience. It's an intense experience and everyone responds differently. Sometimes people, the entire emotional spectrum from laughing hysterically to, bawling with for hours, these mystical type experiences that are extremely profound. On the other end of the spectrum, sometimes people feel possessed or these kind of like demonic things. I mean, the spectrum is so broad, and everyone, sometimes it's very vocal. Sometimes it's a loud and emotionally intense thing on all degrees of the spectrum. Again, from like unbelievable euphoria to, like, I don't know if I'm going to survive this. Sometimes those really, really deep fears of, one, life or death, am I going to die? Or two, our sanity, our mental wellness, am I going insane? Have I lost my mind forever? Like those will come up in the psychedelic experience pretty repeatedly because it's so intense. And yeah, so I mean, to go back to your previous question, yeah, I think it's really important to communicate that sort of that trust, that sense of unconditional support, that compassion, and to encourage vulnerability and openness. That you want to encourage people to really express whatever is coming up. But I think it's important as well that it's not really a directive thing. In the experience, this idea of a psychedelic guide, the term is appropriate in some senses, but it's like when the person is in their experience, I'm not doing much guiding at all. They're guiding, and it's a dance between the person and the substance. They're navigating this thing. I'm here holding this container of safe space. It is not my role and not my responsibility whatsoever to tell them, go here, explore this, do this. That's a complete, I see that as in almost every case, a violation of, it's an ethical thing, really. But what I think is also important as a psychedelic practitioner is to trust, there's this idea called inner healing intelligence, which is an idea that was put forth by Stanislav Grof, who's like, this really famous LSD psychedelic therapist. And the idea, I mean, it sounds kind of woo, but it's really not. I mean, the idea is that like our physiologically speaking, it's like when you get a cut on your arm, our body knows how to heal it. As time passes, the healing will occur. It's really only like when we mess with that, when we, put our finger in the wound and rip off the scab, it takes longer to heal. But this idea of inner healing intelligence is that our psyche, the same exact thing is true for our psyche. Some part of our psyche on a really deep, on a really deep level knows how to move towards wholeness and wellness naturally out of the same intelligence that orchestrates the beating of our heart and all of the various physiological processes, trillions of them simultaneously. It's really exquisite and amazing. But, like the same thing is true for the psyche. So like as people are going in to the psychedelic experience, very, very repeatedly, very reliably, the key issues that this individual need, or that are most pressing, that are closest to the surface, that need the most attention will come up. I don't have to do that as a facilitator. It's more about creating that safe space so that the individual is able to let go of resistance and fear and anxiety, because a lot of times those issues are terrifying to face. I mean, talking about like healing trauma, for example, sometimes that can conjure up incredibly, terrifying and powerful emotions, memories, thoughts, feelings. And it's only natural for the body for us to kind of resist that. But that's the equivalent, right, of like picking at the scab. And that's when the healing process stagnates, when we just push it all down.
Right.
But this is really what the psychedelic experience, psychedelic therapy in particular, the context is so important, at least as important as the substance itself. It brings up all of this material that's oftentimes repressed and suppressed, brings it up out of the unconscious mind into the light of awareness, as you said, and that's where the natural healing intelligence like accelerates, and like these things can be resolved and released and processed. And it's really, really amazing to witness that, to be a part of that. I mean, it's always an honor.
So then in your kind of belief, how do you see that this healing almost occurs more because of the psychedelics as opposed to just naturally? Because the way I'm seeing it, right, and I agree with you, is that they're held kind of down in the subconscious as these traumas, and that we need them to come up and to acknowledge them in order for us to do our own natural healing. Do you see like psychedelics as giving people more courage to face those issues, or does it kind of force you to put them into the light? Is it the setting that kind of, enables people to kind of get there? Like what kind of gets that healing going or accelerates it?
Really good question. I think, there could be multiple books written on this topic. And I will say, a big part of it is kind of a mystery. Like, I think in research, we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of this. I mean, there is a neurophysiological level to it, right? Like the shutting down of the default mode network that's been observed in a laboratory setting. So there is that sort of neurochemical part to it, but it's, of course, much deeper than that. And more mysterious than that. There's sort of three key elements here. Well, let me say, first of all, that it really is about like bringing all this material out of the subconscious or unconscious mind into the light of awareness. And that's a process that can happen, of course, can and does happen through talk therapy alone, but it's much more challenging. And in a lot of cases, like people aren't aware, it's unconscious. We're unconscious of the unconscious. We don't know what's there. It's in the darkness. And most people, I think, are unaware of just how much material there is there and how emotionally charged it is and how profoundly that affects literally every single choice, every single waking moment of our life, our entire experience of life. The unconscious mind is so incredibly powerful and affecting everything. So what psychedelics have the capacity to do, and a large part of it is this neurophysiological aspect where it's shutting off the default mode network of the brain. It's almost like this threshold between the conscious and the unconscious mind is lowered so that all of this material starts to bubble up naturally. It's like very common to hear people say that, oh man, I just like had this memory of when I was like 7 years old and this thing happened. I haven't thought about that in 40 years. It's almost like it bubbles up to the surface. And again, that's absolutely, it's possible to get there with talk therapy, but the therapy, I mean, it's much lengthier and you have to be a highly skilled practitioner to do that because you have to navigate all these person's unconscious defenses, unconscious resistance, high levels of anxiety to even get to that core material, right? It all just kind of happens a lot of times. It all just kind of happens organically in the psychedelic process. But there's really three key or mediating factors to psychedelic healing. The first is cognitive insights. So we get all these new insights into our own psychological history. It's like we recover these memories. I've seen people recover a traumatic experience that they didn't even remember they had experienced. It's called dissociative amnesia. When people experience trauma, a lot of times the brain will push it so far down, you don't even remember it, and yet that trauma is affecting our experience of the
It's
world.
almost like your brain like dissociated from the body in that time of trauma, and so then your mind like doesn't remember it, and when it tries to reintegrate, it's still in the body, but then your mind doesn't conceptualize it. Is that a good way to describe it?
So true. Yeah, it is. It is a good way to describe it. Trauma is stored in the body. Psychological wounds are stored in the body. And again, you can get to that embodied somatic cellular level through talk therapy, but it is challenging, man. It's really hard. But yeah, so there's these cognitive insights, getting all these new insights about our life, about the nature of reality, about relationships, career, purpose, all these different things. There's also emotional release or catharsis as kind of like the second factor, which is as this material comes up, it's not just a thought or a memory. There's all these feelings that are sort of grafted onto it. And it's this powerful emotional release. And that's the level on which a lot of healing is happening. It's not just like, oh yeah, I remember that thing happened. It's like, now that I remember that thing happened, all of these emotions are pouring out. And like, that is catharsis, right? It's like opening up the pressure valve and letting out all of this pressure. And it just brings so much more harmony and lightness to the system. It's like, taking a load off of our shoulders. A lot of people will have these psychedelic experiences and say like, that felt like 10 years of therapy in 5 hours. And I feel so much lighter because it's this release, right? And the third kind of mediating factor is the mystical experience. So like all of the research, agrees that people who have a higher degree of a mystical experience or more kind of spiritually profound or mystical experience also experience the most profound and enduring healing. So like these mystical experiences, another super interesting, fascinating topic that raises all kinds of questions about the nature of reality. But, there are these like peak spiritual mountaintop experiences that feel like communing, a direct connection with divinity, with the sacredness of life. Oneness and interconnection is really kind of like the core characteristic of mystical experiences. There's this feeling that what I am, the one who is aware, is fundamentally and profoundly interconnected to everything, to all of life, and we are part of a much greater reality. And there's something incredibly healing about that. A lot of depression and anxiety and mental illness come from feelings of disconnection, man. It really does. Like in this,
when you feel,
in so many
you
ways,
feel like you're alone or something like that, it usually takes over in those areas.
Disconnected from the world, disconnected from other people, disconnected from ourself, disconnected from oneness. And in these experiences, it's almost like everything. A lot of people will say like, in spite of all of the horrible things that have happened in my life, in spite of all of the darkness in the world, all is well.
Right. All
is well. Everything is in its right place. Not only that, but I had to go through all of these experiences to get to where I am today. So it's like this profound, like reframing, shift in perspective that brings a lot of peace.
And so that's so fascinating in itself, right? Because it sounds like you're dealing with such a wide range of emotions, right? From grief, shame, guilt, anger, all the way up to this, the oneness, the feeling of enlightenment, the feeling of a mystical experience. And so I'm curious as to how you as a practitioner, maybe you could shed some light on like how frequently you're holding space for people. But I'm also curious as to like how you kind of can stay centered emotionally, because if, you're seeing, let's say you do one a day, that means that there's seven times a week that you're, experiencing, very strong feelings of shame or of guilt or of depression or of these negative feelings. So is there a way that you kind of are able to keep yourself sane a little bit, or emotionally centered in order to kind of help these people as you transition them?
Yeah, another really good question. Well, I mean, in terms of the frequency, so like I work at a retreat center, right? We hold retreats. They're week-long retreats. Each retreat has 3 dosing sessions over the course of the week, and I do 2 of those retreats per month on average. on each retreat, there's about 10 guests, usually on average. And so it's not every day. I mean, resting is a big part of it. You know, self-care. This is, man, kind of a cliche in the field of social work. Like I was sick of hearing about self-care by the time I graduated. But no, I mean, it's real. It's important. You know, there's a lot to be said here. I think that in order to be a psychedelic facilitator or therapist, there needs to be a high level of self-awareness, a high level of emotional intelligence, a high level of resilience. So, I mean, it's like not everyone can be an ambulance driver. Right? It's like you have to have a special set of, you have to be able to function and cope under intense pressure and anxiety in certain roles and occupations. The same is true for this. I mean, you need to have a level of emotional intelligence, knowing how to receive and process and handle difficult emotions within ourselves, and be engaged in our own self-work, in our own process. I think that's one of the most fundamental things for anyone who wants to be a psychedelic facilitator. You cannot show up in a good way if you have massive blind spots. We all have blind spots, but are you working to do your own kind of shadow work? You know, are you aware of where your trigger points and your buttons are, and what are some of your unresolved emotional material? We've all got it. But are you working on it? And along with that, do you have an aspect of emotional stability and resilience in your life? Because it's very true. I mean, these retreats are emotionally intense experiences. They really are. And I think meditation and mindfulness is a big part of that. You know, staying active and moving one's body, I think, is a good way to move energy as well. And maintain a healthy system. But, you know, at the end of the day, like, it's almost always a happy story, you know, which makes the job way easier and more fun. I mean, like, as a sort of talk therapist, it's like you can be working with the same client for years and like get to this point where you're banging your head against the wall. And it's like, it just feels like it's stagnating, it's plateauing. Where's the progress? With this, it's I'm not saying that it's 100% effective for everyone. Certainly not saying that whatsoever. I'm also not saying that everyone should go out and try psychedelics. I don't think that everyone is in a position in their life to benefit from this experience like today, right now. But almost always, I mean, you, like at the beginning of the week, you're hearing people share these stories of, you know, often super intense trauma, like really heavy stuff, the worst things that you can imagine. Happening to people in their childhood. You're taking that on board, but you know, also as the week unfolds and progresses, you see the healing happen. I mean, it's one of the coolest parts of the job. Like, you can actually see the transformation taking place. You can see it in people's body language. You can see it in the way that people carry themselves, in their facial expressions, in the way that they communicate and express, and make eye contact. It's like, it's really, really powerful and enriching. And like, I think that is, I mean, that's a big part of it as well for me too, is just like, I have such a profound trust and faith in this medicine and really in life itself. So, you know, I don't think that, this is something that, you know, some people, it comes more naturally to some than to others. Some people have to really work to cultivate that emotional stability and resilience. And I'll say as well, like, that's especially true in the trip space because, you know, you're seeing these like pretty intense emotional outpourings sometimes. Sometimes people are enraged. Like, they have all this rage and anger that, you know, like, their father was a terrible person and was abusive, just as a hypothetical example. And I've seen this happen. Someone spending the entire trip raging and yelling obscenities and cursing their father loudly. Okay. So like, you have to be able to be in that like emotional intensity. And for the most part, it's more on the opposite side of the spectrum where it's like, joy, more joy and lighter emotions coming through, but it's the whole spectrum. And as a facilitator, it's really important that we've cultivated the ability to remain grounded and present and centered in the face of that. Because if we're wearing on our face an expression of like concern or fear, like what the is going on, or like really getting anxious, then because I mean, people in the trip space are, it's like they're hyper aware, they're hypersensitive. They're going to pick that up, and that just makes the whole situation even worse. So yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's an important part of being a facilitator. A big part of the job is just to smile.
Yeah. Is that like the biggest tip that you would give to someone who wanted to be a psychedelic therapist? Just smile.
Yeah. No, that's not. I wouldn't say that's the biggest. I wouldn't say that's the biggest tip. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but you know, that is a big part of it for sure.
So I think also an important thing that you kind of pointed out in there was the disclaimer of, you know, this isn't for everyone. Don't just think that this is like an end all be all. Like, don't just sign up for it just because like your friend thought about it or something. I guess I kind of view this into the idea of people say that like the plants call to them. Is that a phrase, I guess, that you're familiar with? Like the plants call to you? Like, I guess I've experienced it where it's like, okay, like something resonated in your life where it was like, okay, got some camera issues there, where it's like this needed to happen, or like something with like psilocybin said, yes, I need to go do this, or I need to go to this place. Like, is that a saying the plant kind of called you? Is that a saying that you're familiar with, or how would you kind of describe it maybe to somebody who's considering it but not sure?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that is absolutely a phrase that I've heard, and I guess that I've used as well. I mean, it definitely felt that way when I first discovered DMT. It was like, man, I can't even tell you, like this magnetic like draw, like I have to explore this thing. But yeah, I mean, well, I'll say this. There are certain conditions which almost necessarily exclude certain people from exploring psychedelics in the first place. Anyone who has any kind of like psychotic like features, psychosis, schizophrenia, even if it's in the family history, I do not advise them to explore psychedelics because it can precipitate a psychotic episode, basically, that lasts beyond the effects of the substance itself. The same is true for bipolar. People who have bipolar, the psychedelic experience can set off a manic episode that, again, lasts beyond the duration of the substance itself. So, you know, I never want to play gatekeeper. I never want to say like you should and you shouldn't. That's not my job. But
Sure.
I want everyone who is genuinely interested in this to have the opportunity, if they pursue it in a safe and responsible way, that maximizes safety both for themselves and for others. But you know, those are important considerations. You know, yeah, this idea of like being called to the experience, I think that it touches on this, you know, kind of the topic of intuition. It's like I do believe, and this is the more mystical side of me speaking rather than like the scientific, but I do believe that we each have this sort of inner guidance system, you know, and
For sure.
Emotions are a big part of it. Like, you know, this kind of like spiritual cliche, like follow your bliss. It's, you know, it's pretty cliche, but there is truth to it. It's like, when our emotions of joy, happiness, positivity, wellness and excitement and, curiosity, intrigue, it's like the compass needle pointing to true north, you know? And it's like, that's when, and intuition is obviously a big part of that as well. It's like a lot of people make decisions just with their kind of rational mind. It's important to weigh out the pros and cons, of course, but I think like there's a deeper level to decision making that's takes into account that the emotional component and also the intuitive component. And the emotions and the intuition are kind of like this compass needle that are guiding us forward. And it's almost like something greater is the invisible hands of life are like, you got to do this now.
Yeah.
You know, and I think a lot of times that is the case with psychedelics. But honestly, I'll say as well, like a lot of people arrive to this retreat center saying, I hear this all the time. It's like, I've been in therapy for 30 years. I've tried every single SSRI, antidepressant, benzodiazepine. Nothing has worked. And at this point, I don't know what else to do. And it's a place of desperation. And, you know, that's a really, really challenging place to be in. I mean, a person who arrives to the experience who has active suicidal ideation.
Right.
But, you know, in some cases, and this is one of the beauties of psychedelics. It is a glimmer of hope that for someone who's tried literally every single possibility and they're at the end of the line, man, they're like, I have nowhere else to turn. This is my last chance. If this, you know, and again, it's not 100% efficacy, but it's damn near close. And it moves the needle, and in a way that other psychiatric medications can't even come close to, you know.
Do you think that it's a good place for people to come into the realm of psychedelics in, where it's like, you know, almost this abandoning, I guess maybe not an abandoning of hope. They still have hope, but it's like, you know, I've tried everything. This is my last chance for hope. You know, do you see like that being helpful for people that are trying to find, you know, that salvation they're looking for? Or do you see the people who are like, oh, I'll try this, or, oh, I've heard that this works for people kind of thing? Like it kind of strikes me as odd and I guess odd just because I haven't seen it this way, but as like the end of the road, like this is my last chance for something to work. I guess it almost feels to me as if they're almost putting too much pressure on the psychedelic to be this saving grace. Does that kind of make sense?
No, that's true. I would agree with that. And I certainly wouldn't say that, I don't think it's necessarily a good or healthy or positive thing to see it as some sort of kind of, you know, silver bullet that's going to fix all our problems, because it's not necessarily. But you know, it's really hard to make like blanket statements with this experience, because every case is so unique and everyone is so different that you know, hopefully that's not the frame of mind or the place that the individual is in when they come to the psychedelic experience. But if so, then so be it. And I'm glad that at least they are able to maintain that aspect of hope, because that's where life becomes really, really dark, man, is when we have no hope.
Right.
And you know, if psychedelics in a safe and supportive environment provide that ray of hope, then I mean, come on, like what are we waiting for?
Yeah, it's almost like, and I find it so fascinating, like everything that you're even saying, and that we have all these like psilocybin retreats of sorts, and these monumental case and anecdotal studies that point to the fact that there is therapeutic nature for it. It kind of still boggles my mind that it's still even something that's in question of, you know, being a Schedule I drug, when it's like, okay, what do you mean it has absolutely no signs of therapeutic nature? It's like, it's honestly one of the best teachers. It's one of the best therapists that I've personally ever, you know, utilized. And, you know, I've seen other people. It's like, you know, you go through this profound experience in 5 or 6 hours, and it feels like 5 or 6 years of psychiatrist training on at some level, where it's like, how in the world did and it comes back to the whole like going within, and it's like you're your own best teacher, and like letting these things kind of come up, and you're the best healer you have. And it's maybe at some level of that we have separated the human from that experience, or making you think that you'll find this salvation outside of you. And the drugs and the psilocybin and psychedelics, they're like, no. You're learning this the wrong way. It's all within you. It's like all the healing that you need, all the power that you need is within you. And the psilocybin is just like the guy, your doorman, opening the door to say, look, here it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, completely agree with that. And I think it is a shame that there's not more. Well, it's changing really rapidly. I think the recognition of the legitimate and revolutionary therapeutic efficacy of various psychedelic substances when used appropriately in a safe and professional context is a game changer. A quantum leap from other psychiatric medicines, which really only address symptoms, right? Like you take an antidepressant, at no point is it going to the root cause of why you're depressed in the first place. So you're taking these things every single day for months, years at a time. Of course, there's all these like adverse side effects versus taking 2 or maybe 3 doses of a natural organic substance that grows from the earth that can go to the root cause and create lasting change. So that's what I mean by a quantum leap. It's a whole other realm. And a lot of the studies out of Johns Hopkins, just as an example, with the psilocybin in treatment of depression, this is the single most effective psychiatric intervention that has ever been documented in the treatment of depression and addiction and various mental health conditions ever,
right?
Compared to any other,
It's so wild.
But it again, it's not just. I want to be clear too. It's not just the plant medicine itself. It's that plus therapy. The combination of the two is where the magic happens.
And that's probably a good thing to point out, right? Because you can use it for recreational use, but the power of the setting that you're in, right? It's about set and setting. Whenever you come to psychedelics, it's like, what's your purpose and where are you doing it? Because if you're just doing it for fun, I mean, sure, you can have fun with it, but that's also where you see that people can have these bad trips and they go into these negative places, and it's hard for them to kind of sometimes, not always, get out. And I think that there's certainly something to be said for the setting that you are experimenting with these drugs has such an impact on the way that you perceive them and the way you integrate them. And maybe that's something also is like, do you guys have do you guys discuss integration after you kind of go through this whole mystical experience? And then there's a way that you need to break down what you experienced to like work it into your present reality.
Oh yeah. That's a big part of what we do. I mean, before and after every psychedelic session, we meet as a group, and we have we have a licensed therapist on every retreat. We have a registered nurse on every retreat, and an extremely experienced team. And this is a huge part of the work that we do is these group discussions before and after each dosing session.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Do you feel like this is something you're going to do for a while then? Is continue to work on with psychedelics?
Yeah, in one capacity or another, this is my life's work.
Yeah, man,
this is till death.
Yeah,
pretty much.
That's awesome, man. Good for you. That's hard for people to find.
Yeah.
Do you see it as like as mostly just helping people, or is it just kind of like, all right now I'm just helping people, but in the future maybe something else? I'm just going to follow where life takes me.
Yeah. I mean, it's multi-layered. I mean, I guess there's, here's the big picture is that the world needs healing and the world needs awakening. I recently heard someone say that like humanity right now is in a race between consciousness or catastrophe. Either we evolve or we will self-destruct. Like, that's not being pessimistic. That is a fact. And we can continue to play politics. We can do all the, we can, do whatever kind of social, whatever, agendas and programs in the outer world. But until we evolve inwardly, until we open our minds and open our hearts and reconnect with oneness, reconnect with what I would say is the sacred or the spiritual, and evolve, awaken. This is some of what Eckhart Tolle talks about in his book A New Earth, and many spiritual teachers have been talking about this for a long time. Even the ancients, going back to the ancient Mayans, the ancient Egyptians, they prophesized of this time. They said that the world would descend into darkness, but there would come the dawn of a new era where we remember, we forget, and then we remember. And humanity is now at this inflection point. We're at such a crazy, interesting, wild, beautiful, bizarre, terrifying time to be alive as a collective species, where we are on the verge, we are on the precipice, and we need evolution, we need healing, period. And so that's big picture. I mean, that's big picture. What drives me is like just playing my little part, because it begins within each one of us, right? Like this collective awakening of humanity begins within each one of us. Like world peace begins within each one of us, just like how all the conflict and all the wars also begin as inner conflict within people. And so working to help people find healing, find awakening is probably the most meaningful thing that I've found to do. It's a big part of why I make YouTube videos as well, because like if like these ideas and this information and these like teachings can touch even a few lives, like that's pretty awesome. And yeah, I mean, so that's like big picture, but there's also that inner experience of, again, my curiosity and passion and excitement is what really is a big part of what drives me as well. And it's like, this is one of those things where it's like, the more you know, the less you know. There's the horizons of the psychedelic experience, the horizons of consciousness itself are ever expanding. There's like always
the new frontier.
More.
It's like the new frontier of our generation.
Yeah. I mean, like, people call space the final frontier, like Star Trek and whatnot, right. But really, like, that's only in the material paradigm.
Right.
Consciousness for me is really the ultimate frontier.
I mean, I'm right there with you, and honestly, I feel like this is a great spot to wrap this up, because that's such a beautiful message, in my opinion, to kind of end this on. Because I'm right there with you. I feel like that's a huge motivator I have, even with this podcast, is to get this information out, exactly what you're talking about, out there to, even if it's just my friend group, my, 100 people circle, whatever it is, just to get that conversation started. And it's just going to have that ripple effect across humanity, across mankind, to get us into, that if you're into mythology, that age of Aquarius, where, we have that knowledge, we're able to fully understand what we're going through. And so to close it out, I would love to, I'm going to grab your links from you and throw them down in the description below. So,
cool.
But other than that, is there anything you want to, final remarks, any words of encouragement, disclaimers, anything like that you would love to share with the audience before we get out of here?
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. It's been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much again for having me on your podcast. Really enjoyed connecting with you. I think we see alike in a lot of ways, and I appreciate the work that you're doing as well to just start the conversation. That's what it's all about. I mean, I would say that, if there's anyone listening who wants to connect with me, you can find me. My YouTube channel is Cosmic Consciousness with Jonas. We've also got a website called innervisionpsychedelics.com. where you can reach out and schedule a free session, a free meeting with me. So, yeah, thanks again, Clayton. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. And I know we'll be in touch and have you on for hopefully another episode.
Would love to.
Hell yeah, man.
Maybe then we can finally dive into the whole UFO, all that stuff, because that's just another fascinating and interesting wild card going on.
It's fascinating too. You bring that up because there have been multiple people I've had on this podcast that love talking about it, but the conversation just like hasn't gotten there yet. So I have like some sort of belief that I don't know if the podcast isn't ready for the UFO conversation. I don't know what, maybe, the whole world's got their own thing going on. I don't know, but something about me saying that, like, it's just the podcast isn't ready for it. So
hey, we'll get there.
In due time, right? Divine timing.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, again, Jonas, thank you so much. Guys, go check out his stuff. He's got amazing videos on YouTube about consciousness, about the afterlife. If you like any of my content, I know you're going to like his. With that being said, thank you for making it to this point. I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed, liked, commented, all that fun stuff on whatever platform you're looking on. But even more important than that, like Jonas and I have discussed, is share this with, anyone you've had an inkling of a similar conversation with, because, like we said, we're in the age of Aquarius. This is the age where we remember, the age with more knowledge, and, beautiful things are coming. As dark as this whole era has seemed with, wars and COVID, it's only getting that much better. So with that being said, I appreciate you conscious monkeys for listening, and let's grow together.